All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we've got a really interesting challenge. You all have given us a set of 20 frequently asked multiple choice questions
Oh, wow.
in English literature. And these were compiled by Dr. Jasvant Rathod. So consider this our
Sure.
rapid fire exploration into some really foundational aspects of literary study. So we're not just going to
Yeah.
try to get the right answer, but really kind of dig into the context
Yeah.
and, why these questions keep coming up.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about this collection is how efficiently it spotlights like
Mm,
core authors and pivotal works and essential concepts and even, the sweep of literary history
right.
through its movement. So
Yeah.
it's a really fantastic way for people to either solidify, knowledge that they have or gain kind of a surprisingly comprehensive
Right.
overview of some really significant terrain.
Yeah, for sure. So let's just jump right into it. First question.
Mhm.
Who is considered the father of English literature? And the options are William Shakespeare, Geoffrey Chaucer, John Milton, Samuel Johnson, and Edmund Spenser.
Yeah.
And the answer, according to Dr. Rathod, is Geoffrey Chaucer. Now, I
Yeah.
think for a lot of people, Shakespeare might be the first name that pops into their head. So why Chaucer?
Yeah, well, what's so significant about Chaucer is his place kind of in the linguistic landscape of his time. So he's writing in the late 14th century.
Okay.
And that's a moment when English, as we would recognize it today, was really coalescing
Hmm.
as a literary language. So before him, formal writing in England largely existed in Latin or French,
Okay.
the languages of the court and the church.
Hmm.
And so Chaucer, most famously with the Canterbury Tales, really makes this decisive move to write in the vernacular, the everyday language of the people.
So it was more than just a collection of entertaining stories. It was really a pivotal moment for English itself.
Precisely. So he takes, the language that's spoken in the streets and demonstrates its incredible capacity for, sophisticated storytelling, nuanced character development,
Right.
and intricate poetic artistry. And by doing so on such a grand scale, he essentially elevated English
Wow.
to the level of high literature.
Right.
And so that is just a monumental contribution, and it's why he's so often hailed as the father of English literature,
Right.
because he's laying the very groundwork for everything that follows.
Okay. The next question pivots to the Bard. Which of the following is not a play by William Shakespeare?
Okay.
And the options are Hamlet, Dr. Faustus, Macbeth, Othello, and King Lear.
Right.
And the answer is Dr. Faustus.
Yes.
Now, those are all pretty well-known titles. What's the key difference here?
I think this question brings up a really important point, which is that Shakespeare, while obviously, a towering figure,
Right.
wasn't working in a vacuum.
Yeah.
So Dr. Faustus was actually penned by Christopher Marlowe,
Yeah,
who was a
Marlowe.
contemporary of Shakespeare and a real dramatic force in his own right.
Right.
And so Marlowe's plays, like Faustus,
Yeah.
often grappled with these, huge themes, ambition, transgression, the
Yeah.
supernatural. And his work actually had, interestingly, a notable impact on Shakespeare's own writing.
Huh.
So while we rightly celebrate Shakespeare, it is important to remember, the vibrant
Yeah.
and influential theatrical world that he was part of,
Right.
populated by other talented playwrights.
For sure. That's a good perspective to keep in mind. All right, let's move on to another literary giant, John Milton. The question asks, what is the main theme of his epic poem, Paradise Lost?
Right.
And the options are the fall of man, the redemption of humanity, the nature of free will, conflict between good and evil,
Yeah.
or all of the above. And the correct answer is all of the above. I feel like anything less than all of the above wouldn't capture it.
Exactly. I mean, if you consider the sheer ambition
Yeah.
of Paradise Lost, it's truly, epic in its reach,
Right.
in that Milton is tackling the very foundations of, human experience, our relationship with the divine, and the profound consequences of our choices.
Right.
So the fall of Adam and Eve is undeniably central.
Right.
But Milton so intricately weaves in, the possibility of redemption, the complex dynamics of free will.
Mm.
And we see that explored through, the decisions of both humans and even Satan.
Right.
And then that just timeless struggle between good and evil on like a cosmic scale.
Yeah.
It's a poem that continues to resonate because it grapples with these just fundamental aspects of what it means to be human.
Yeah. What a huge undertaking for any reader. All right, let's move on to the novel.
Okay.
Which novel is widely considered Jane Austen's masterpiece?
Right.
The choices are Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Emma, Mansfield Park, and Persuasion.
Okay.
And the answer is Pride and Prejudice. I mean, such a beloved book. What elevates it to the status of masterpiece?
Well, I think what's so enduring about Pride and Prejudice is how deftly it blends a captivating love story
Right.
with his really sharp, insightful commentary on the social fabric of, 19th century England.
Okay.
So Austen really masterfully portrays, the societal pressures and expectations that were placed upon women, particularly concerning marriage and social standing.
Yeah.
But, at its core, that witty and dynamic relationship between Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, explores these themes that are, I think, really universal. First impressions versus, deeper character, the complexities of social class,
Right.
and then this burgeoning sense of, individual independence.
Right. It's a book that feels remarkably modern, I think, in its exploration of these human dynamics.
Yeah.
And Austen's sparkling wit and keen characterizations are, I think, arguably at their absolute peak here.
Yeah, its popularity really, really speaks to her skill.
Okay.
Next up, we have a question about another iconic novel.
Okay.
Who is the author of Wuthering Heights? And the choices are Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte, Anne Bronte, Jane Austen, and George Eliot.
And the correct answer is Emily Bronte.
Yes.
It's interesting that all three Bronte sisters are listed as potential answers here. So was there like a real strong shared style or focus in their writing?
That's a really perceptive question.
Yeah.
Charlotte, Emily, and Anne Bronte were indeed literary contemporaries.
Right.
And they all produced, significant novels that engaged with, complex social and emotional themes within a similar kind of Victorian context.
Okay.
However, Wuthering Heights, which was Emily's sole novel,
Right.
possesses this just singular intensity, this like raw emotional power, and this like darkly gothic atmosphere that really sets it apart.
Right.
It delves into these passionate, almost like elemental relationships that are played out against this really dramatic backdrop of the Yorkshire moors. And so while Charlotte's Jane Eyre, for instance, shares some thematic concerns,
Right.
its narrative structure and overall tone are much more conventional.
Right.
Emily's work is much more sui generis
Okay.
and kind of defies easy categorization, and I think that contributes to its unique and lasting impact.
Right. That untamed intensity is definitely a hallmark of that book.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to literary movements.
Yeah.
What literary movement is most closely associated with writers like T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound?
Right.
The choices are Romanticism, Victorianism, Modernism, Postmodernism, and Realism. And the answer is Modernism.
Yes.
So for someone who might be encountering this term for the first time in a literary context, like how would we characterize it? What are its defining features?
Modernism, which flourished roughly from the late 19th to the mid-20th century, really represented this like radical break from many of the established conventions of Victorian literature. And I think what's really fascinating about modernism is how it mirrors the profound social, political, and technological upheavals of the era, including, the impact of World War I. So in literature, this manifested in a real spirit of experimentation with form, a move towards like fragmented narratives, and a really deep exploration of the inner, often psychological experiences of characters.
Okay.
So think about techniques like stream of consciousness,
Right.
nonlinear timelines, and then this pervading sense of like alienation and uncertainty and a questioning of traditional values. So Eliot's groundbreaking poem, The Wasteland, and Pound's very ambitious.
Yeah.
Cantos are, I think, really quintessential examples of this modernist sensibility.
So it was a real shift in terms of how stories and poems were being constructed.
Exactly.
Okay. So building on that, the next question is, which of the following is a characteristic feature of postmodern literature?
Okay.
The choices are linear narrative, objective truth, metafiction, traditional forms, and moral certainty.
Right.
And the correct answer is metafiction.
Yes.
That sounds intriguing. That sounds very self-referential. So can you elaborate a little bit on what metafiction entails?
You've hit the nail on the head. I mean, metafiction is essentially fiction that is consciously aware of its own fictionality. And what's really interesting about it is that it often plays with the conventions of storytelling.
Okay.
So it deliberately draws attention to the constructed nature of narratives.
Right.
So authors might directly address you, the reader.
Right.
Characters could be aware that they exist within a story.
Okay.
Or the narrative itself might like intentionally disrupt its own flow.
Okay.
So it's a very self-reflective approach
Yeah.
that often questions the very notion of like a single fixed truth
Right.
and frequently embraces ambiguity,
Mm.
irony, and a
Right.
really playful blurring of the lines between fiction and reality.
Right.
So imagine, reading a novel where the author includes their own struggles with writer's block as part of the plot.
Right.
That's a prime example of
Yeah.
metafiction at work.
That makes it really clear, the story turning the lens on itself. All right, let's shift gears geographically and culturally a bit to a really, really significant work. Who is the author of Things Fall Apart?
All right.
The choices are Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, Njigawa Thiong'o, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and Ben Okri.
Good.
And the answer is Chinua Achebe.
Yes.
So what makes this novel such a landmark, I guess, in world literature?
So if we think about the broader literary landscape, Things Fall Apart stands as this really foundational work of African literature, written in English. It was published in 1958.
Okay.
And it provides this really powerful and nuanced portrayal of Igbo society in Nigeria
Okay.
on the cusp of and during the early stages of British colonialism. And what's so crucial, I think, about this novel
Right.
is that it offers an authentic African perspective.
Yeah.
It directly challenges, the often stereotypical and even dehumanizing
Right.
representations that had, historically dominated Western literature about Africa.
Yeah.
And it delves into the rich complexities of pre-colonial Igbo culture, the profoundly disruptive impact of colonial rule, and the internal conflicts and tragic consequences
Right.
that arise from this clash of civilizations. So
Yeah.
it's a truly pivotal work that continues to be widely read
Yeah.
and studied for its historical, cultural, and literary significance.
Absolutely. Offering a vital and often overlooked perspective.
Exactly.
Okay, let's delve into the realm of poetry.
Right.
What is the standard term for a 14-line poem
Okay.
that adheres to a specific rhyme scheme? The choices are ode, elegy, sonnet, ballad, and epic.
Right.
And the answer is sonnet.
Yes.
So beyond just the line count, what are like the key characteristics that define a sonnet?
So yeah, the 14-line structure is indeed the kind of defining characteristic. And beyond that,
Yeah.
what's so interesting about sonnets is that they typically follow a specific
Okay.
and often intricate rhyme scheme.
Mm.
And they frequently explore a single focused theme or idea.
All right.
And there are two main types of sonnets to be aware of. The Shakespearean or English sonnet,
Okay.
which usually employs an A-B-A-B, C-D-C-D, E-F-E-F-G-G rhyme scheme,
Right.
and often kind of develops an argument or idea that reaches a conclusion in the final two-line couplet.
Right.
And then the Petrarchan
Okay.
or Italian sonnet follows a different rhyme scheme, typically ABBA, C-D-C-D-E, or C-D-C-D-C-D,
Right, okay.
and often presents like a problem or question in
Yeah.
the first 8 lines, the octave,
Right.
which is then resolved or answered in the final 6 lines, which is the sistep.
Okay. So there's a real architecture to them.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's explore the world of literary theory a little bit.
Okay.
Which critical theory places the primary emphasis on how the reader actively engages with and interprets a text?
All right. Yeah.
So the options are formalism, structuralism, deconstruction, reader response criticism,
Okay.
and new historicism.
Got it.
And the answer is reader response criticism.
Okay.
So what's like the central idea of this approach to literature?
At its core, reader response criticism
Yeah.
really shifts the analytical focus away from the text as like an objective entity
Okay.
or the author's supposed intentions
Mm.
and towards, the dynamic process of reading and
Yeah.
the individual reader's subjective experience.
Okay.
So what's really interesting here is the idea that meaning isn't fixed within the pages of the book,
Right.
but is actually actively created in the interaction between the text and you, the reader.
Okay.
And because each reader brings their own unique background, personal experiences, perspectives to the act of reading,
Right.
different readers will inevitably construct
Yeah.
different interpretations
Yeah.
of the same literary work.
Yeah.
And so this theory really explores how these diverse individual responses
Yeah.
contribute to kind of our overall understanding and appreciation of literature.
So it really empowers the reader as a co-creator of meaning.
Exactly.
Now let's return to a specific play, of a specific character. In Shakespeare's Hamlet, what is the name of Hamlet's mother?
Okay.
The options are Ophelia, Gertrude, Desdemona, Cordelia, and Portia. And the answer is Gertrude.
Yes.
So what are some of the key aspects to remember about Gertrude and her role in the play?
Gertrude is a fascinatingly complex character
Right.
who has really sparked like considerable debate among literary critics for centuries. And what's particularly intriguing, I think, is her really pivotal position
Yeah.
within the play's central conflicts.
Okay.
So she is, of course, Hamlet's mother and the widow of the recently deceased King Hamlet.
You're right.
Her very hasty remarriage to Claudius, who's her brother-in-law,
Yeah.
is a major catalyst for Hamlet's, profound grief
Right.
and his questioning of the moral order.
Yeah.
And her own motivations, whether she was complicit in the king's death
Right.
or simply seeking security and stability in this very precarious situation,
Yeah.
remain ambiguous.
Right.
And that really adds layers to her character and fuels, Hamlet's just deep moral and emotional turmoil.
Right. That ambiguity really contributes to the play's enduring power. Now we have a question that kind of circles back to a foundational figure,
Okay.
underscoring his importance,
Right.
who is the author of the Canterbury Tales.
Okay.
The options are William Langland, Geoffrey Chaucer, John Gower, Thomas Malory, and Sir Thomas More.
Got it.
And the answer, once again, is Geoffrey Chaucer.
Right?
So no surprise there, but just really solidifying his status.
Absolutely. I mean, this repetition, I think, really emphasizes, again, his singular contribution
Yeah.
to establishing the literary potential of the English language during his era. The Canterbury Tales, again, is not just a collection of stories.
Right.
It's this vibrant and detailed snapshot
Right.
of medieval English society.
Yeah.
And it's rendered in a language that was, at the time, still relatively new to literary expression.
Right.
So its enduring appeal lies not only in its kind of linguistic significance,
Yeah.
but also in, its lively characters and these
Ah.
really engaging narratives.
Right. All right. Let's transport ourselves to a very different setting. What is the primary setting of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness?
Right.
The choices are the Amazon River, the Nile River, the Congo River, the Mississippi River, and the Thames River.
Okay.
And the answer is the Congo River. So why is this specific geographic location so integral to the novel's themes and impact?
So the Congo River, and specifically the Belgian Congo during the late 19th century,
Right.
serves as both a literal backdrop
Yeah.
and this, really potent symbolic landscape for Heart of Darkness. And what's so significant is that this region was a site of, brutal colonial exploitation under King Leopold II of Belgium. And Conrad uses, the journey up the Congo
Right.
as both like a physical and a metaphorical descent into kind of the darkness of human nature, which is fueled by greed, unchecked power, and the horrific mistreatment of the indigenous population. So, the oppressive atmosphere of the jungle, the pervasive evidence of colonial brutality.
Right.
Those aren't merely incidental details. They are deeply intertwined with
Yeah.
the novel's exploration of, imperialism, savagery,
All right.
and the corrupting influence of power.
A stark and unforgettable setting that really amplifies the novel's critical message. Now back to the Victorian era, but focusing on a different literary giant. Which of the following novels was not written by Charles Dickens?
Okay.
And the choices are Oliver Twist, Great Expectations, Middlemarch, David Copperfield, and A Tale of Two Cities.
Right.
And the answer is Middlemarch. So for those who might be less familiar, who penned Middlemarch?
So Middlemarch was written by George Eliot, which was the pen name of Marianne Evans.
Okay.
And I think what's fascinating to note here is that Eliot is considered one of the other major novelists of the Victorian period, standing alongside Dickens in terms of her literary achievements.
Right.
And her really insightful engagement with, the social issues of her time.
Okay.
So while both authors explored, the complexities of Victorian society, Eliot's work often delves with, I think, greater psychological depth
Okay.
into the inner lives and moral dilemmas of her characters. And Middlemarch, in particular, is celebrated for its, intricate web of interconnected storylines.
Right.
And its really profound exploration of provincial life, individual ambition, and the societal constraints, particularly those faced by women
Right.
in Victorian England.
So both towering figures, but with their own distinct
Exactly.
literary signatures. All right. Now for a question that plays with the sounds of language itself.
Okay.
What is the linguistic term for a word that directly imitates the sound it represents?
Right.
The options are metaphor, simile, onomatopoeia, alliteration, and personification.
Got it.
And the answer is onomatopoeia. Can you give us a few vivid examples
I can, absolutely.
to bring this term to life?
So onomatopoeia is all about words that, sound like the noises that they describe. So
Yeah.
think about the buzz of a bee,
Right.
the hiss of a snake,
Right.
the sharp crack of thunder, or the
Yeah.
gentle drip of a leaky faucet.
Right.
So these words have this really, direct auditory connection to
Yeah.
the sounds that they represent.
Right.
And they create, I think, a more immediate and sensory experience for the reader or listener.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a way for language
Yeah.
to almost echo the real world.
It's like the word itself carries that sound.
Exactly.
Okay. Next up, we have a question about a very influential poem of the modernist era, who is credited with writing the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock.
Right.
The choices are W.B. Yeats, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, Robert Frost, and Wallace Stevens.
Okay.
And the answer is T.S. Eliot.
Yes.
So where does this poem fit within the context of, his work and the wider modernist movement?
So the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which was
Yeah.
published relatively early in Eliot's career in 1915,
Okay.
is, I think, a really seminal work of modernist poetry.
Mm.
And what's so significant about it
Yeah.
is it's, again, radical departure from traditional poetic forms,
Mm-hmm.
and its unflinching exploration of themes like alienation,
Right.
social anxiety, and a sense of paralysis that was increasingly, I think, characteristic of modern life.
Yeah.
So Prufrock's fragmented thoughts, his social awkwardness, and his profound inability to kind of express his deepest feelings
Right.
are all, I think, hallmarks of the modernist sensibility that Eliot would continue to develop in his later, more complex works, like The Wasteland.
Right.
So it really captures a new kind of poetic voice for a new era.
It definitely resonates with that very modern sense of unease and self-doubt.
Absolutely.
Let's return to the world of Jane Austen and a question about a very central relationship. In Pride and Prejudice, who ultimately does Elizabeth Bennet choose to marry? The choices are Mr. Darcy, Mr. Bingley, Mr. Collins, Mr. Wickham, and Mr. Knightley.
Okay.
And the answer, of course, is Mr. Darcy. What makes this particular union so crucial to the novel's central themes?
So the eventual marriage of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy is, I think, the satisfying culmination of the novels, intricate exploration of Pride and Prejudice, both on societal and personal levels.
Yeah.
And what's so compelling, I think, is the journey that they both undertake, overcoming their initial misjudgments and biases and social prejudices to finally recognize each other's true character and worth.
Yeah.
And their union really symbolizes the potential for, genuine connection and love to transcend, superficial social barriers and preconceived notions, emphasizing the importance of, individual merit and mutual respect as the foundation for a truly meaningful relationship. So it's that kind of hard-earned and deeply satisfying resolution of the central romantic arc. And I think it's a key reason why the novel continues to captivate readers today.
It's a testament to, looking beyond first impressions and digging a little deeper.
Exactly.
Okay. We're nearing the end of our rapid-fire quiz here.
Right.
What is the standard literary term for the central underlying idea or message that a work of literature explores?
Okay.
So the choices are plot, theme, motif, symbol, and allegory.
Right.
And the answer is theme. So in simple terms, how do we define theme in literary analysis?
Simply put, the theme of a literary work is its, fundamental underlying message or central idea that the author wants to convey. Mm-hmm. And what's important to distinguish here is that a theme isn't just a summary of what happens in the story, which would be the plot.
Right.
But instead, the theme kind of delves into that deeper meaning, what the story is really about on a more kind of abstract and universal level. So a single work can often explore, multiple interconnected themes like the complexities of love, the inevitability of loss, the struggle for social justice, or the search for identity. So these are the core ideas that the author kind of invites you to contemplate.
Right. So the essential takeaway, the bigger point the story is trying to make.
Exactly.
All right. Now a question about structure of dramatic tragedy.
Okay.
Which of the following is generally considered a defining characteristic of a tragic hero?
Right.
The choices are noble birth, a fatal flaw, a downfall that results from their own actions, all of the above, or none of the above.
Okay.
And the answer is all of the above. So can you elaborate a little bit on these key elements that constitute a tragic hero?
So these are like really classic elements
Yeah.
that have been recognized since, the ancient Greek tragedies.
Right.
And what's crucial here is that a tragic hero typically begins in a position of like high social standing or noble birth.
Right.
So they command respect and admiration. However, they also possess this significant flaw,
Right.
often referred to as, hamartia, which could be like excessive pride, hubris,
Right.
overwhelming ambition, blinding jealousy,
Yeah.
or some other inherent weakness in their character or judgment.
Right.
And it's this flaw that sets in motion, a sequence of choices and actions
Right.
that ultimately lead to their own downfall.
Right.
And that downfall is often, accompanied by immense suffering and loss
Right.
for themselves and those around them.
Yeah.
And, the audience typically experiences this
Yeah.
mixture of pity and fear for the tragic hero,
Right.
recognizing their potential and kind of lamenting their fate.
Right. Think Oedipus, think Macbeth,
That's
individual
so
of
rough.
great stature, brought low by their own failings. All right, finally, we arrive at our last question, focusing on the origins of a very popular genre,
Okay.
who is widely regarded as the founder of the detective fiction genre.
Right.
Choices are Arthur Conan Doyle, Edgar Allan Poe, Agatha Christie, Dashiell Hammett, and Raymond Chandler.
Okay.
And the answer is Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes.
That might surprise some people.
Yeah.
So what are Poe's contributions to establishing this genre?
So I think what's fascinating here is that while Arthur Conan Doyle certainly achieved like widespread popularity with Sherlock Holmes,